in our lives at the moment that might be of interest to discuss. Often those end up being mainly questions for Rabbi Blumberg, which is perfect because it'll be good to have him and share his insights and such like. So, without further ado then, Rabbi Blumberg, I always like to begin with the question, if you were preaching this year, what subject or subjects would you have chosen for your sermons, and what might have been some of the messages that you would have shared with us on these High Holy Days?
Personally, a delight with you. Paul and I have been participating virtually, and this is the first time we've missed at Tikva holiday, and really missed being actual community, and this is the best. Delighted. I made a museum not speak, even though they invited graciously to do so. And a few weeks ago, Paul said, "Aren't you glad you're not going to talk this year?" I must say that it is relief for us to
We're having a few sound issues with the way that it's picking up your sound. I'm not sure if there's something that one of the more technically adept people in the room are going to suggest.
That's not on my end.
If Rabbi Blumberg can do that? Okay, so what should I? We're just going to suggest that you do one thing, Rabbi Blumberg.
Yes.
If you click on the next to the audio on your screen, and it should show audio settings. Oh, and you should, if you can click on original sound for musicians, that should be better. It should be just up on the microphone modes. So if you click on the icon next to audio settings next to the microphone and then go to original sound for musicians, that five up from the bottom, that should be a better setting for your microphone.
Oh, that's it.
John's going to share on our screen and see if
that better?
If you talk a bit more.
Yes. Switch the phone. Leave.
That seems a bit better, or what does it say? Can you see the screen? Are you checked now, Rabbi Blumberg, for original sound for musicians?
I don't have that. No.
Next to the microphone, there's no icon to click on to.
There's a select the speaker. It says.
Do you have and below? If you go down from there, do you have an audio settings option?
Let's see. Yes, settings we are. Okay. Now audio settings.
It should be original sound for musicians. Should be one of the audio settings, perhaps.
How's that?
If you keep talking, it just keeps cutting in and out. So it's if you keep talking. So if you speak, Rabbi Blumberg, just say a few words. If you just keep just start talking about the sermon that you would deliver, and we'll see if it's working. Let's do that.
I'm in set.
Okay. Well, let's try you speaking now and see if it's fixed the sound issue. Okay. If you try speaking now, Rabbi Blumberg. That seems a little bit better. Let's try. Let's try. We'll see what we can do. So we were just. I think, in case people didn't hear, you want to you should share your anecdote with Paula again, because I'm not sure everyone heard the...
No, it's very simple. Paul had asked me at some point if I was happy I wasn't speaking, and they would give me a major talk this year. And I filed with relief that was the case.
Yes.
But I'm delighted to be here now with you guys.
So if you had been speaking, if you had accepted the invitation to deliver a sermon, what might have been the subject that you would have wanted to speak about this year?
Well, I certainly would have to have spoken about Israel, and just said are obvious because of the October War. I certainly on the left of the spectrum have been struggling with the fact that Israel no longer has the appeal as the Jewish seat that it had for my adult life. Israel's values in the hands of the current administration, and has been very difficult for many of us to tolerate. So I think I'm really been addressing that open, honest way.
And I think it's definitely my sense from looking at various other rabbis' pages is that there was at least some reference to Israel in a lot of communities this year, and in different ways maybe than was spoken about last year with some of the changes and things that have happened since then. Please.
Asked about Israel, and really continue to believe that it is the place for a center of Jewish life. But unfortunately, at this point, the large swatches of population no longer the values that I think at the core of the Jewish experience.
There's an interesting thing.
You talked around your talk today, and I struggle in a way that I could never have to say. But it's something. The good news is that there is at least large community in Israel that is very upset with what has been going on with the Exodus. And I know it's very complicated, the Bible, and they're one of the Jewish in Israel and wherever. I know that, but it's out.
I think as we reflect on the challenges there and the divisions in Israeli society, one of the things that does cause me concern is that the direction that the kind of center ground in Israel is moving in is not necessarily in line with where diaspora Jewry would necessarily want it to be moving in, and I think that demographics are going to change. When I was there recently, one of the headlines that was in the newspapers around the start of the school year was the fact that in Jerusalem, for the first time, the number of children I think it was the number of children enrolled in ultra-Orthodox schools was greater than the number of children enrolled in the public schools in Jerusalem. So that tells you something about the direction that the population shift is going, and that might, and because of the way that the electoral system works there, that will ultimately have an impact on the way that the electorate vote and who ends up in the government and so on and so forth. And so it's not necessarily a problem that's going to finish soon.
And this is probably another sermon, but one of the outcomes of the last years is the solution of the younger generation of American Jews. particularly the younger generation. And it has been challenged to their Jewish identity and Jewish
I have reflected in terms of the way that the different generations do deal with the Israel piece, that this idea that we experience Israel in different ways, and so the lack of ability for maybe our more senior generations to be able to talk in a common language with our younger generations, because their perception of what Israel is are so different that it creates problems in terms of even being able to talk about it. Because for many of the teenagers today, and even people into their 20s, their Israel has been an Israel of the last 20 years, which is an Israel of second intifada, of the ongoing challenges with the Palestinian people in that way, and not an Israel that pursues peace, which, if they were a little bit older, there'd be memories of Oslo processes and other things that I think impact the way that we might relate to the country in that respect.
The victim mentality is no longer something that many Jews can deal with, particularly younger generation.
Sorry, we're still having a few sound issues of hearing different elements of the answers. But we will persevere and hope for the best in that way. So I want to ask you another question, Rabbi Blumberg. So this morning I talked about this idea of that we are a choosing people, that we choose Judaism, and that we need to think about why we choose Judaism. And I was wondering, for you, having lived your life in the rabbinate and all the different experiences, of why you choose Judaism for yourself and your family.
I have the ethical system, moral system at the core of Judaism becomes more and more important to me, and that has firmed up, strengthened my choosing to be a Jew. But what is that the sense that the sermon that after you gave your sermon this morning, what I have is it's not a matter of choosing to be a Jew, but it's choosing to live a distinctly Jewish life in terms of ritual, in terms of diet, in terms of holiday observance. That is now at the core of what I must do as Jews. So it's choosing to be a Jew enough. It's how do we express Judaism? And more I find myself locked on Jewish behaviors in terms of ritual, in terms of holiday purpose, in terms of study, both deepen and firm up Jewish identity. So it's the next step beyond Jewish identity.
It's interesting to think about that move from ethical and moral Judaism to a ritual Judaism, because I wonder, especially, and we mentioned the younger generation, of which ways they're connecting with their Jewish identity, if it is more around the ethics and the morals and less maybe around some of the ritual elements, in terms of, if we would survey how many keep kosher, for example, or how many have a Shabbat practice and observance, versus how many of them are motivated by the ethical instructions, it would be interesting to see where that fits, especially for the younger generation that you referenced earlier.
Yeah. Well, one of the issues, Danny, is that the younger generation is probably somewhat disillusioned with the far left, and that's a good opportunity to grasp onto the Jewish experience. And
for that choosing Judaism, so making that move to the rituals and some elements of Jewish observance, if there was one ritual that you would want people to kind of experience as their Jewish ritual of choice, as their kind of gateway into more rituals potentially, what would be the ritual that you would want people to experiment with or try out of the breadth of Jewish offerings, and why?
Shabbat observance. Shabbat observance. Not just lighting candles for 10 minutes of Kabbalat Shabbat, but somehow building the discipline of a day set aside for contemplation and for rejuvenation of body and spirit.
I think that's lovely. And when oh, sorry, keep going.
I just add to that requires being part of a community and a community of observers, of people who are observing Shabbat. And that can be not only enriching, but can be life-changing.
Mm-hmm. I think when you talk about Shabbat, there are two observations. One, when doing preparation for the sermon, Rabbi Jonathan Sachs kept, in his sense of Jewish pride, or what Judaism brings, kept returning to Shabbat as this revolutionary concept that really the Jews gave to the rest of the world, and that of all the things that when he, in his writings, talked about what gives him pride in terms of Jewish ritual, he returned again and again to Shabbat. So you're in very good company with the folks on Shabbat in that respect. The other thing that I think is just interesting for us to think about when we do think about rituals that are thousands of years old that have a modern application today, I do think Shabbat is one of the ones that we can see the real power of that and the importance of that. I wonder if you would say a little bit more, because you said, though, about community as part of the need for the observance of Shabbat. So maybe say a little bit more about the need for community in the Jewish people, and maybe what you're seeing in terms of Jewish community today as the different communities that exist out there, if you'd like to.
I'm not sure exactly what you're asking.
Just for you mentioned community as needing a community to observe Shabbat fully. So I wonder if you could say a little bit about your ideal Jewish community, or the Jewish communities that you feel we should be building and engaging with in our lives.
Well, I don't think it's going to take place necessarily in the synagogue. I think the synagogue is going to be the gateway to smaller groups of people, chavurot, if you will. It's an old idea, but for small groups of families to get together in their home, doing Shabbat ritual and Shabbat study and Shabbat menucha.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's an important part of it.
Mm-hmm. Sorry.
I would just add that for there to be a community of people who gather together for worship, which includes the liturgy of Shabbat and study, is also part of it.
Mm-hmm. I
and
think
that's happening. That's happening in many, many places.
I think there is an interesting piece for us as we consider for our Shir Tikva community, that kind of sense is, as the community grows bigger, how do we maintain the intimacy and that Hamish feel, that kind of sense of smaller community in the sense of a bigger community. This is one of the few days of the year where we kind of feel that breadth of community when this space is filled with 800 plus people and we do multiple services. But throughout the year, how do we maintain the intimacy? This is a day that's harder to have an intimate prayer experience, but keeping an intimate feel, I think, is something that's really important. And it's interesting to go back to the Chavurah idea. As you say, it's not necessarily a new idea in that the Chavurah movement was 40, 50 years ago, kind of as a really important part of American Judaism, as an idea of coming together in small groups and how we can do that. So with that, I wanted to just ask for our community, when we think about the future and this day of Yom Kippur and looking ahead to the year, looking back at the year that has been, what things from this year that have been, it's recognizing that it's been a difficult year, are there things that are giving you hope in terms of the future for the Jewish community specifically, but if you want to speak more generally as well, what are some of the things maybe from this past year that you would hang on to as we go into the year ahead? This is the portion where I've given him no preparation or no word of warning of what I'm going to be asking. So he's on the spot completely.
I think that one of the things that I have experienced in the last couple of years is the sense of wonder. I think Hensel uses the term radical amazement. Sense of the presence of the divine in human experiences, in human relationships, world of nature. If I've had the opportunity to become more contemplative in my thinking and in my experience. And it's a matter of stopping, rushing around. It's a matter of suppressing one's ego. And it's a matter of finding the divine in every human being, every experience, every encounter. And to me, that's been at the core of my ability to move forward. And it's interesting that's not limited to people who I'm usually with, but meeting all kinds of people and hearing their stories and having people be kind to me, taking care of me, given my disability. It's very heartening to do that. And I think I've come out of that experience again and again with a little better of a person. So if you ask me, hope, I think the hope is there because the divine is present if we stop and look around and experience.
I find it hard to believe that you're stopping and not rushing around, because my experience of you is always going in lots of different directions and very busy. But I think it's a very important practice to have that sense of pausing and being able to appreciate. And when we started our Mussar class, the staff here at one point were learning a bit of Mussar with Carol Shaw, and one of the lessons she stressed at the beginning was every soul, holy soul, and that sense of seeing the sacred in the soul of another person. And I think seeing the divine in another person, I will say I do wonder that in this current moment, with some of the forces that are out there in various directions, seeing the divinity in another person is not always easy, especially people with whom we disagree and might be opposed to in different ideas. And I'm wondering if you have any insights on how we still see the divine in those circumstances, because I think that's something that people struggle with, of how do we, again, that subject of how do we talk to people with whom we disagree, and how do we, by extension, see the divine or the value and the worth in that person.
I wish that I had the opportunity to talk to people with whom I disagree. I don't have such opportunities, even in this retirement community, which is very good. I wish that I could talk to people about what's really in their hearts and why they believe what they believe. Without disputation, without argument, but just to try to understand them better. I'm pretty well convinced that would give me great insight into them, and there would be learning.
I think that one of the things we hope to be able to try and do this year is to try and find some opportunities for facilitating those conversations here in a Shir Tikva context, recognizing that not necessarily everyone in our space agrees with each other on every single issue, even if there are consensus broad consensus on certain subjects and certain ideas in that respect. With that, I'm wondering for you if you have any reflections. One of the peaks of this past year was when we got to celebrate your 90th birthday here at Temple Shir Tikva, and we got to have you here at the service. We got to have the celebration afterwards. Your family were here. It was lovely to have your grandson, rabbinical student Joe, participate as well. And I'm just wondering if you could just share. I'm sure most of us, a lot of us were there. We got to celebrate with you, but we haven't spoken to you necessarily about it afterwards. So I wonder if you have any reflections on that day, on that experience, things you'd like to share with us after that experience, because I know that was a peak moment that we take from last year into this next year.
Well, that's a great question. Firstly, it was a high beyond my expectation. I kind of went into it reluctantly, but the experience itself was fun. But more than that, I came to see the strength and the power and the beauty and the love that is the Shir Tikva community. And it kind of mushroomed not out of nowhere, but it was a surprise to me. And that sustained me to this moment. I did use the opportunity to be somewhat reflective in terms of how I got to be who I am, and I continue to marvel at the good fortune that I had in my life, beginning with Paula and continuing with the extraordinary children, and extending to so many people who remain friends and closest acquaintances from within the Shir Tikva community. So this is our community. One of the sadnesses of this moment, because we're dealing, Paul and I are dealing with COVID, or not with you in person. We miss the community. We miss the community. I said to Paul earlier today, I know every word and every song, every gesture that I see in front of me. So the 90 kind of solidified many of those feelings that came out of nowhere. And I remain grateful to you, Danny, and to all of you who put this together.
It was, I think for us, it was a lovely reason to have a celebration, and lovely to be able to celebrate you in that way and to share in that joy with your family.
Danny, can I ask you a question?
We're going off script, but certainly yes. Sure.
I'm curious what you think is the future of Reform Judaism.
So he asked the little one. So after we talk about his party,
well,
we get
to ask you little ones. I ask you little ones.
Yeah. So I think this is a really interesting moment actually for Reform Judaism, because I think that some of the ways that we've approached our religion are being put to test. I think there are some challenges in this moment that we are needing to confront that are not easy. And I will say that I've intentionally, not necessarily, there are different groups within the Reform movement at the moment going in different directions. Intentionally, I've not engaged with any of them specifically, because I think they are maybe pushing too much in different directions. And I think it's that question of balance. But for me, one of the big questions that I think we need to address within Reform Judaism is we need to get the balance between the particular and the universal in our sense of being. And what I mean by that is, I think we've been excellent as a movement at universal values with a Jewish lens. So tikkun olam, how we care for the stranger, what we do for others, our social justice work, I think we have really leaned into that as part of what we do. But I think in doing that, I worry that in the Reform context, we've lost some of the particular of what it means to be Jewish. Why is that a Jewish thing to do? There was always an interesting thing that happened. I don't know if it happened when you were at HUC, but when I was at HUC, so one of the things that they would do is we had to give sermons at a certain point, 4th and 5th year, that would get reviewed by your fellow students. Let me tell you, there is nothing worse than giving a sermon to be reviewed by other rabbinic students. It was a hellish experience because essentially it is an exercise in how you can nitpick in another person's presentation, no matter how good it was. And some of my colleagues, tremendous preachers who've gone on to amazing pulpits and in amazing places, and you would still hear the way that their sermons were destroyed in that setting by their fellow students. So, I mean, Rabbi Blumberg is nodding, Rabbi Gervis is nodding here. So I think this is an ongoing thing at HUC as part of our Hebrew Union College experience. But in that setting, one of the questions that would get asked often, because I think this was how they used to nudge and needle, was, could you deliver the same sermon in a church? And what made this a sermon that was for a synagogue or a Jewish setting as opposed to a non-denominational setting? For our purposes, maybe a Unitarian setting is the easiest one to consider down the road, but what makes it that? And I do wonder and sometimes worry a little bit that we've lost some of the, and just to be clear, I never asked that question. That was not my my experience in those settings. I would never ask such a thing. But I do think there was a piece of wondering about what is it that makes this our particular way of doing social justice work? What is it that makes our practice particular to us as Jews? And how can we lean into that balance between the particular and the universal? And more than just in practice, also in that sense of connection. I feel a universal obligation and connection to humanity, but I also feel a particular connection to Jewish community and communities and have that sense of both of them. And I wonder about how we allow and help Reform Judaism to lean into both. Because I think we have to, the politics, I worry, and this is a longer answer than I intended to give, but I do worry that with the politics that Reform Judaism has embraced, which have generally been more liberal and more on the left, that with some of the movements in the left, that is making it harder for Reform Judaism to situate itself there today, with some of the more extreme things that we're seeing. And so I think we need to move away from some of that and back into what the particular is of Jewish life and Jewish identity in a package that fits in the modern world. So I love that you talk about Shabbat observance as being the ritual. And my question is, how do we do Shabbat observance that is meaningful for us today? Not because the idea of not lighting lights and things like that doesn't resonate necessarily as what Shabbat really means for us in the year 2025 as opposed to what it might have meant at a previous time. I don't know if that answers the question, but that was a lot of
That's a great
thoughts.
answer. That's in a sense what I was getting at when I spoke about Shabbat observance. There is a scaffolding within the Jewish experience that gives us a structure that's very particular. And it's okay to have that particular structure. If more people in this country had their own scaffold, their own support system, their own way of expressing themselves, I think we'd be better off. Mm-hmm. But clearly, we have been dependent, we as liberal Jews have depended upon, I'm not sure what we've depended on American values. And at the core of our value system is a scaffolding which gives us ongoing strength and enrichment.
Just one interesting thing. So earlier this year, I had the opportunity to join a Hartman Day. The Shalom Hartman Institute is a wonderful institute based out of Jerusalem that has offices in New York and elsewhere. And they did a day of learning in the Boston area. And Yehuda Kurtzer talked about, I think it was him who talked about America versus Judaism. And one of the things that he said that was so interesting that I wonder if you want to comment on in relation to what you just said, but he said, America is a country built on rights. Judaism is a religion built on obligation. And rights versus obligation is where we sometimes come to blows in terms of our place and how we think of this country, that maybe there needs to be more obligation, less about, it's my right to do this. but what am I obliged to do? Judaism approaches from the obligation sense before it approaches from the right sense. I'm paraphrasing, but that's what he was alluding to and teaching in that moment.
Yeah. So essentially, what you're talking about is a different concept of liberal Judaism. It's Reform Judaism is built more on right than an obligation. And I think that the pendulum must swing back to maintain some of that. Obligation is not a good word, but let's use it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So I'm going to ask you one more question, and then we're going to throw it open. The one other question I was wondering, so as we know from your 90th, and as I'm sure some people know, your grandson Joe is a rabbinical student at JTS pursuing ordination. And I'm wondering what you've told him about the rabbinate, what one or two things you've told him to prepare for in terms of becoming a rabbi with the experiences that you have had of a lifetime in the rabbinate. Are there things that you would share, that you would be willing to share with us as well, that you've suggested to him in preparing for that role?
I try not to give him too many opinions, to share too many opinions, and even less advice. I think that I have communicated to him that the rabbinate can be extraordinarily fulfilling, but it requires a lot of introspection. That's about what I've said.
So I think what we're going to do is we're going to throw it open to questions. Now, for the questions, you are going to need to speak into the microphone, because I think the only way that Rabbi Blumberg is going to hear you is if you do use the microphone. So even if you have the loudest of voices, please do speak into the microphone. So if you have a question that you would like to ask us as in this way to add to the conversation, please do raise your hand, and Alison has the microphone to pass it round if anyone does have a question. If not, I can keep asking and we can keep talking to ourselves.
I would just, this is Bruce Tophius.
Can you hear Rabbi Blumberg?
This is Bruce Tophius. Hello. I wanted to ask a question about the growth or shrinkage of the Jewish community. And if you think that the hostility and the anti-Semitism is pushing more people back into Judaism, or that there are things about what we do as a congregation or as a community that draw people in. So are we more push or are we more pull?
That's a great question. Rabbi Blumberg, do you want to go first?
You start, David.
So I think we've definitely seen that in the last couple of years there has been a push factor of people needing a place where they can feel comfortable to be Jewish. And we've had people since October 7th who've come here who would never have connected to the Jewish community in the past, who wouldn't necessarily have felt that they needed a Jewish home in that way, but in this current climate with anti-Semitism, recognize the need for a Jewish home, or recognize the need to be investing in synagogue as the Jewish presence in their towns and in their local community. So we definitely are seeing that. But I think that more than that, people are staying and engaging, because I think what we're able to do here is zoom in on offering a Judaism that's meaningful and that speaks to the contemporary moment. That we're not trying to necessarily say you need to fit into this box of this is what it means to be Jewish, but that we've offered a way of thinking through what connects with people and what gives them meaning in their lives, and to offer that through a Jewish lens. Mussar is always the interesting example that I give in our Shir Tikva context, because I go back to if you'd have said 20, 30 years ago that we'd have hundreds of people studying Mussar, that our religious school, Hineni, would have a Mussar curriculum, people would have said, probably first, what's Mussar? And then they would have said, you're crazy, that's just not, that's peripheral, it's fringe. But the truth is that Mussar offers insights and learning that are relevant to the current moment. And so we've leaned into that because that's what people need. And so I think by leaning into those areas of offering Judaism that speaks to people, I think that's the pull factor. And I think Judaism continues to offer some wonderful answers to most of the contemporary problems and challenges that we're facing. I sometimes joke that our packaging is not great. The assumption of what Judaism is not great, in terms of you assume it involves this and this obligation, and you have to do this, that, or the other, or it's orthodoxy and whatever else. And so that's alienating before people have even stepped in. we have a packaging problem. But once we get people past that to see what we're doing here, how it speaks to their lives, how we're trying to maintain it as being meaningful, and that it's not about you must do this or you need to do this. People will sometimes say, I'm sorry I don't come to services more often. And our answer as a staff team, as a team now, is we love seeing you whenever you're here, and that's wonderful. And whatever way you want to be here is wonderful. It's not that there's a hierarchy of Jewish involvement, but any involvement is wonderful involvement. And so I think those are the pull factors that people are looking for. And then the one last thing I'd say before handing back to Rabbi Blumberg is I think that there's a wider thing in our society which might go back to the push of people looking for community. People feel that need for connection. I think we were experiencing that generally. COVID accelerated it. But that need for community and connection, I think we thought we could live in our own fenced off areas, and it doesn't work. And I think we've experienced that in a variety of ways. And so that bowling alone phenomenon has kind of shifted to actually looking to be part of the league again and to be part of the connection with other people.
I'm concerned with the younger generation that has equated Jewish experience with Israel and now is so totally turned off to what is taking place, what's transpiring in Israel. It impacts their willingness to identify themselves as Jews in I think in significant ways. I think we're in danger of losing a whole generation of Jews because of the excesses that are taking place in Israel today.
Thank you. Another question from the floor.
Hi, this is Ray Salemi. I've got a small questions about God. So if I look at the range of what people think about God, you have Jews in the whole range, from I'm an atheist but I'm Jewish, live with it, to God runs everything and I have to do what God says. Where do you see this congregation and Reform Judaism in terms of the range of people, or how many people, where do people tend to land in their concept of God as someone who is either not there or prescribing what to do?
That was an easy one. So, Rabbi Blumberg, you made me go first last time, so over to you.
The whole range, I think that many people retain their childhood, what they learned as children about a God as a kind of a super persona that is ultimately in charge and manipulative. They retain that because they haven't learned anything more sophisticated, but of course they reject that notion. They retain it because they have no other notion. And I think that things like the Musar movement, a contemplative examination of life is necessary to create sophisticated notions of divine.
So I would echo the idea that there's a wide range here. I think one of the things that's interesting is that we, in the Reform movement, often are reluctant to talk directly about God. That we kind of shy away from being too specific or dealing with it in a direct way. I think one of the beautiful things about Judaism and about the community is that we have such a multiplicity of ways that we can connect to God, that there are different versions and viewpoints that are all acceptable and can all be part of the wider sense of Jewish connection. And I think for people here, I think there's a sense of the divine. I'm not sure how people would describe it in that way, to go into too much more detail. And I do think that, as Rabbi Blumberg suggested, the childhood image of God as the old man with the beard in the clouds persists in ways that is unhelpful for a more mature divine relationship or a more mature way of sensing the divine and experiencing the divine. But I think that there's a sense of something greater than ourselves in most of the community to some degree, whatever that might mean. I don't know that I'd want to go too much more specific in
The
definitive.
question that we have to ask is, whatever your idea of the divine, how does that impact life? How does it change your life? How does it enrich your life? And if you can't get good answers, then you maybe want to revise the notion of the divine.
Thank you. So we have a bit more time, so we can definitely do at least another question, maybe even two. Oh, there we go.
My name's Jacob. In the story of Adam and Eve, God created humans, so like he's all-knowing. My question is, why did he tell Adam and Eve not to eat the apple knowing that they were going to eat it?
Oh. So another little question that is not necessarily at the heart of all the Jewish understanding of, I don't know if you heard Rabbi Blumberg, but why did God tell Adam and Eve not to eat the apple if God knew that they were going to eat it anyway?
I'm not sure I can answer the question so succinctly.
I don't know that I can do it succinctly, but I'll try anyway. So I think there's an interesting piece of thinking about what goes on in that initial stage of putting the tree there, this tree that it's there, but you're not allowed to eat it. That it's almost a setup in that respect. And one can wonder about what God is trying to do in that moment. If you take the kind of Christian perspective, then that leads to the original sin, and then we are all the descendants of that original sin concept. But I like to think that perhaps this was a challenge to see what maybe we are supposed to wrestle with God. And one of the things, and it didn't necessarily didn't make it into the sermon, but in one of the edits, and there were too many edits this time around, but one of the things that I was playing with was this idea of what it means that we are called Israel. Because we're not the children of Abraham, we're not the children of Jacob, we're the children of Israel. That's the catch-all name that we assume for ourselves. And Israel, which is the name that Jacob got as a kind of designation of honor, was received after wrestling with God. And the name Israel can be translated as God wrestler. And so I think there's this piece of that we're not necessarily supposed to accept things as they are, but we're supposed to wrestle with things as they could be. And that maybe it was a challenge to see that would we think for ourselves, be independent in some way, to challenge ourselves in that sense from the very beginning in Eden. When we read on Rosh Hashanah the story of the Akedah, and this idea that God tested Abraham to see whether he would sacrifice his son, in the Orthodox community there's that sense Abraham passed every test because he does what Abraham said. Abraham passed the test because he did what God said. In my book, Abraham fails the test because he didn't push back to God. And actually, he never speaks to God again. He never speaks to his wife again. So if that's passing a test, I'm not sure that I want to pass tests. So there's this question, I think, that maybe we are placed to challenge God and to wrestle with God. And that's one of the reasons God wants us and not just angels, because we don't offer a blind obedience and blind service, but we struggle and wrestle in that way and wrestle with questions like that to understand our connection.
So I would add a very succinct comment. It is the Adam and Eve story there is a classic myth that reminds us of limitations, human limitation.
Wonderful. So I think let's do one last question. We're going to squeeze it in. If we're running late, I'll take it up with the clergy team and apologize. But one final question. And we go to our president for the final question.
Hello, Rabbi Blumberg. This is Amy O'Donnell. So, as Rabbi Danny asked you earlier about reflecting on your 90th, I am struck by your reflections on where we are now and, looking back. But what I wonder is, when you started this gig so many years ago, what was your vision? I know where we are now, but could you have imagined this? Is this what you were envisioning? Was it different? Was it? I don't know. What was your vision?
Amy, at your bat mitzvah, I knew exactly what you would become, president of I had no idea. We started out, Shtickler was a small, funky, minimalist, lazy place that didn't have a Sunday school. Danny, I don't know if you know this history, but they used to rent out the building on Sunday morning to some church group. And the first time I walked in the building, it was strewn with chairs from whatever had happened. Couldn't possibly, no, it's not true. I think I envisioned that we would become a serious Torah study, more traditional, observant, Reform synagogue community. And I think that's what we've become.
So with that, Rabbi Blumberg, as always, we are so grateful to you for taking the time to join with us. And the only thing that we hope is that next year you will be here in person for the conversation, and maybe another sermon over the next High Holy Days. We will be inviting you as always, but we will definitely make sure that there are further opportunities to learn with Rabbi Blumberg and spend time, and just know that we send our love to you and Paula at this season and wish you Gmar Chatima Tova and look forward to seeing you in person very soon.
Thank you. I think we should have explained that the reason we're not present is that both of us have COVID and we're recovering from COVID.
Yes, so they will be back very soon and back in the Shtickler building. So I think I know we don't normally applaud in synagogue, but for Rabbi Blumberg, round of applause. Thank you for joining us. And thanks for being with us. And it is lovely to know that you are on the end of the camera watching as we continue with our services. So thank you everyone for being with us. We will take a 7-minute break, essentially, and then we will resume with our afternoon service briefly. So pick your favorite seat, get situated, get a machzor, and we'll be beginning soon. Thank you, Rabbi Blumberg.
Thank you.